Hey y'all, welcome to the Coyote Trapping School Podcast, episode number 28. Today's episode, I just wanted to talk a little bit about trap selection and maybe some misconceptions some folks might have and just kind of make sure you understand my standpoint where I'm coming from. So I sometimes kind of get accused in some of my videos of being a trap snob. And I would say that's fairly accurate. You know, I've kind of, in my mind anyway, in my opinion, kind of graduated to a certain level of that I've kind of weeded through, and I've used a variety of different traps and gone kind of the cheap route starting out, and I see the benefit of making an investment in your traps that you use, and so that's what I've done. But I guess, you know, I say all that to say I didn't start out that way. You know, I started out like a lot of folks, you know, just getting interested. I was in high school, and you know, you have limited budgets as far as what you can afford, and so you kind of try to get the best bang for your buck and get something that you can use. And then then you start learning about it, you know, and learning tweaks and what works and what's you know, what's worth paying for, what might not be worth paying for, and so that's you know, a lot of my recommendations, like, you know, I'm real big on using the MB550. I like the MB550 as a predator trap. Yeah, you can. It's twice the cost of a dozen Dukes, Duke number 2s, but in my opinion, to me, it's worth it. And that's from my experience using. I mean, very first coyote I ever caught was in a number 2 Duke. You know, my conibears, I've transitioned all my conibears to Belial conibears because I like the way they operate. I like the way they work. I know that if something sticks something in that trap and gets fired, whether it's its head, its foot, its tail, whatever, it's going to hold it there. And to me, that's worth paying a little bit extra for, to know that if I catch a beaver by the tail in, you know, a lot of other conibears, that I'm just going to be left with a snap trap and never know what happened. But if I catch a beaver by the tail with that Belial, he's going to be there when I get there, and I like that. You know, especially if you get to the point where you're doing any kind of damage work or nuisance work, where, you know, you've got to catch that last one. You can't just leave seed and call it good and call it okay. That's, to me, even more, and you're getting paid for that, right? So that's, to me, even more of an opportunity where, you know, having the best equipment that you can is going to make you more efficient. And so, you know, to me, that's what, you know, with the MB550s and some of the other kind of more top shelf traps, yeah, you can definitely catch coyotes with a number 2 Duke, but it's going to take a little bit of time investment on your part to get that trap to where it's operating, you know, at an optimal level. And so, you know, and so you've got an investment with it, whether it's money or whether it's time. And, you know, we all got different values on that. And from my perspective now, when I was young, when I first started out, heck, I had plenty of time and not a whole lot of money. So I bought traps and tinkered with them and modified them and adjusted them, and you know, heck, I was happy as a lark. And I think that's a good thing, you know, learning what things to look for and learning why, you know, this is beneficial. But now, you know, with a family and full-time job and all this other stuff, I don't have as much time to spend in the fur shed tinkering with traps and stuff. So I'd rather spend a little bit more and buy something that's ready to go than buy something that I got to work on for 20 minutes before I get it ready to set. So that's where I'm coming from in my recommendations and my liking of the MB550. Like I said, there's things you can do, and that's what I want to touch on. Is some of the things that, if you got a dozen Dukes, if you just bought them, or if you're looking at them, you know, to things to look at and look for. But like I said, don't get hung up on, like with everything else, you know, don't get hung up on, you know, trying to buy top of the line if you know you can't, you know. a dozen number 2 Dukes is better than no MB550s, right? So having traps and actually using them is a better option than daydreaming about having the perfect trap. And there's a lot of folks that still use Dukes and things like that, and they all got their place. Because if you're trapping on public land where you've got a theft concern, you know, I don't really want a $20 trap sitting out there. You know, I'd rather have a $10 Duke than a rigged out MB550 that somebody might steal. And so there's a trade-off there too of you know, where you're going to be using it, how you're going to be using it. A lot of folks will think I'm always hating on Dukes, and man, today I said 1.5 Dukes for coons. I got Duke dog proofs out there on my trap line working right now. Now I did modify the dog proofs, adding the push pull 2-way trigger, and I probably won't buy any more Dukes because I like that push pull trigger. But that's beside the point. Like I said, I mean, I'm not bashing Dukes or a trapper that uses Dukes or any of that. I'm just, from my perspective, I'm trying to portray that, you know, there's some traps that need some work, some traps that don't. I like buying the traps that don't, and you know, being able to use them. So, saying all that, if you do have some traps, you know, you got some Dukes, some Bridgers, some Sleepy Creeks, whatever. What are some things that you might want to think about and look at so far as getting those traps ready to set that will make your life easier? And there's several things, and some of it's kind of personal preference. You know, just looking initially, I'm not real crazy about the side swivel. I like center swivel. To me, it's a little bit easier to bed with all your chain under the trap, but I mean that's really a moot point. I mean that's not a big deal. And you can, I mean, it's easy enough. There's a hole right here that you could swap it to center swivel. The only concern is coyotes are pretty rough on traps, and you may want to consider, and you know, you'll have to figure it out for yourself. You may use a dozen traps and catch, you know, 20 coyotes and never have an issue with them. Or the first coyote you catch, he may wreck this thing. So that's one thing to consider. Not saying you have to, but is adding a base plate on the bottom of it. Especially if you've got a welder and you got a little bit of time, you can buy the base plates that come with a D-ring in the center. Excuse me. Tack that thing on there and you're ready to go. So that's one consideration. The side swivel is the big drawback to me there is if a coyote gets caught and he's pulling from the center of the trap, you know, wherever he pulls, that trap is kind of swiveling with him, so his foot is not as likely to move in the trap once it's caught. But if the side swivel and he gets caught here, when he's pulling, the trap's pulling like this, and so you can see where, you know, he's pulling over here this way, trap's here, so there's more opportunity for his foot to slide in the trap. If his foot slides in the trap, it's probably going to mean it's a cut in the foot. So that's one thing that I like to try to minimize, and so that's one reason I like the center swivel. Number 2, I'm not a big fan of this machine, or this swing chain is what I call it, this twin loop chain. I like machine chain. I like a heavy duty crunch proof swivel attached directly to the base of the trap, and attached to and one on the end that I attach my stake to. Again, that's just personal preference. Man, there's guys that use, you know, this setup to catch coyotes with. More power to you. I'm just giving you my input on things that I would consider if I've got these traps. And this is not specific to Duke. This is any traps. Another thing, probably one of the main things, one of the first things I would say that I would look at, and something I would definitely, I wouldn't consider a recommendation so much as a must, is doing something with your pan and dog in order to ensure that trap fires crisply and makes it easy enough to set so that you know that the trap is right on the verge of firing. So what I did, I bought a couple of one-off traps from the hardware store when I first started trapping, number 2 Dukes and whatnot. And my first dozen traps I ever bought was a dozen 1 3/4 Victors, offset, fully modified, offset laminated, base plated, center swiveled, but they still had the stamped dog and pan. And there's a lot of slop in there. I mean, if you set it with the pan all the way up, you can't leave a trap set with the pan all the way up like that. Ideally, your pan lays level with the it's flat and level. So as you bring it down, you're kind of eyeballing and guessing, and then you're gonna have that thing fire off on you, and especially you start making catches or something like that, and you're looking at it trying to eyeball it, and got mud and dirt in there. I mean, it's not perfect, and it's hard to get it right there at the edge. So that's where a night latch comes in really handy. So you can just file a little notch in the pan right on the bottom edge, so that when you set the trap, you can flip that pan all the way up, do your setting, do your bedding, and once you think you got it solid where you want it, you can ease that pan down until you hear that click, and then that trap is ready to fire. There's going to be minimal creep. You don't really want any pan movement without that trap firing. If that pan moves, you want that trap to fire. And so that's kind of what you're looking for. So that putting a night latch is one way to remedy that. Another way is to just file the notch on the pan down. You can file it down to where it's just very minimal, just enough to hold the dog. And then another thing that I recommend is filing that dog at an angle, because it's kind of, not all of them are perfectly square. They may be a little bit rounded, and that's going to make the trap, it may make the trap a little sloppy in firing. So what I would do, what I recommend, is taking a file and just filing that thing where it's at an angle like this, so that the pan, when it's set, the pan is right there on the tip, and any movement, and it's firing. So that's and that may take some adjusting of the dog itself and this base of the trap. You may have to, once you file that, if you file that pan notch down and then you file you a point on the dog, you may have to adjust the dog a little bit, or adjust the angle of this to get the dog in more to where the pan will lay level. But ultimately, that's what you want when you got that trap set and ready to fire. That pan sitting level, and I don't get too hung up on it, because I got some traps that the pan sits down a little bit, some of the pan sits slightly up, but ideally you want that pan level to start out with. So another thing to consider with these traps is you see you got the ears of the jaw that come through the trap frame, and this is something that I've never seen. But I know it's happened. I know plenty of people have had it happen, and I never used the Dukes very long to encounter it. But with these ears of the jaw, the way they are sticking out, they're not really secured in any way. And so if you get a coyote that's pumping hard on this thing, and the frame starts flexing, those jaws can pop out. The jaw pops out, coyote's gone. So you missed him, you lost him. So there's a couple things. Some folks will just take a welder and kind of bubble that tip, or some folks will take some channel locks or something and bend it up, just to kind of lock that in place, where it's going to take significant changing in the whole trap. I mean, it's going to make it almost impossible for those jaws to pop out. So that's something that I would keep in mind as well, is making sure your jaws are secure. And then there's other options and considerations, like your laminations, your offset, and that's honestly, to me, that's kind of personal preference type stuff. Whether you feel like it's, and some of it's required by law, right? So I always check within your state to make sure you're meeting your local regulations. But rubber jaws, things like that. I mean, all that, like I said, to me, that's kind of, it gets a lot into personal preference. So I go either way on that stuff. But my gist, ultimately what I'm trying to get across is, if you're hung up on buying traps, or you're hung up on getting into trapping because you don't know what to buy, or you really want some MB550s, but golly, they're so expensive. I can get a dozen Bridgers for a little more than what I can get half a dozen 550s for. Well, get them, try them, and see. Something's better than nothing. And that's the only way you're going to learn and progress as a trapper, is to actually start setting traps and catching animals. And the Bridgers, man, I used them. I think they've, since Minnesota, because Minnesota Trapline Products bought Bridger traps, and so they produce Bridger traps now, and they're the manufacturer. And since they did that, I think the quality of the Bridgers has come up a good bit. And I tried some last year just to try them out, because there was I got a podcast coming up where I'm going to kind of go through the cost of getting into trapping, what it takes, what I think you need to get started, and so hopefully that'll be helpful just to get to figure out what your investment is. And traps are kind of the biggest investment, and like I said, I mean, that can range from, you can get a dozen number 2 Bridgers for like $130, I think, and you get a dozen MB550s for over $200. So I mean, there's definitely a difference there, a gap, and so that's kind of all up to you. But most trappers kind of go through that progression, though, is as they get started, they use kind of whatever they can get, hand-me-downs, use traps wherever they can scrape something up at, and then as they progress along and they start seeing what they do like. And that's another thing, is using a couple different kinds of traps, and you may see, well, I really like this aspect of this trap, and this aspect of the square jaw of the Bridgers, but the night latch of the MB550s and things like that. And so because the traps are different designs and things, so but don't be, I guess, and that's kind of the gist of everything. Don't get hung up on, man, I gotta have this exact thing because this guy on YouTube says so. No, get what you can get and get started, and then go from there. And as you, like I said, as you progress, as you see, I like this, or what, I need some more traps. Maybe I'll save up a little more in spring for those 550s and see if they're what it's all about. And that's a great way of testing, seeing what you do like, and kind of comparing side by side this trap to that trap, and using it and seeing. Another thing to definitely keep in mind is be looking for used traps. Somebody mentioned this to me on Facebook the other day, that they run across traps on the Facebook marketplace. There's all kinds of stuff for sale on that thing, and I had never thought about looking on there for traps, used traps, but it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to now. But there's a Facebook marketplace. There's trapperman.com has a First Shed, I think is what it's called, where it's all selling used equipment, used traps and things. And then at any convention, there's always outside vendors. You got your trap and supply vendors, but there's always other vendors that are selling used traps and things like that. And just talking around to different trappers. I had a buddy of mine that was wanting to get started in trapping, and I just bought a couple dozen MB550s, kind of getting ready to phase my others out, and he was asking me about traps. I said, well, I got these. I'd be more than happy to sell them to you, and because I'm getting these new traps, and it worked out good. He gets something that he gets something that's good, something that's set up and ready to work, but doesn't have to pay a brand new price for it. And so that's definitely something else. And I get people messaging me about that pretty regular. I'm looking for some used traps or something like that. I'm looking for some MB550s. And I don't really have any to sell. I like my 550s, and I'm not getting rid of any of them. I need to get some more. So that's a great way to try to get in and get started more on a shoestring budget, if you will. And so far as the prices of used traps, I just always try to get a gut feel. I'll look and see what's a dozen brand new 550s selling for. Well, they're selling for $200, and I'm gonna have to pay shipping. That's probably gonna be another 20. So this guy's got a couple of a dozen 550s that's 2 years old, and he's selling them for 150, and I can meet him in town and pick them up. That's probably not a bad deal. Matter of fact, I would take that deal right now. So there's different options out there to get started, and you don't have to pay top dollar price and get the latest and greatest and best there is. And another thing to keep in mind is trapping is a lot of work, and so there's my buddy that bought those used traps from me, he's trapped, I don't know, a season, maybe 2 seasons, and I don't think he's probably trapped the last 3 or 4 years. And so that's another thing. If it's definitely going to be some work if you don't really have a passion for it, if you don't and a place to do it and time to do it. You may want to be hesitant about forking over an extra $100 on these traps. A lot of what I've seen around the Trappers Association, as I've been in there for the last 15 years, is it's kind of a little bit of a revolving. There's the guys that have been in there. You got your older generation of guys that have been in there that kind of started the organization, and then you got some younger guys that came in and they got started and really got plugged in and have stuck with it. And then every year you'll see some new guys that come in. I used to trap, but then I had kids and things, and the kids are getting a little bit older, and they're asking about it, and so I always kind of scratched my head and made me think, how would you stop trapping? Just because you have kids. But now having one, I can see. Trapping is a serious investment in time and money, and that's 2 things that kids take a lot of, and so it especially when they're little and having multiple ones, I can only imagine. So, but that's definitely something to keep in mind. Those are also maybe good folks to lean on to get you some good used traps too at a deal. So, but like I said, this is probably a little bit shorter podcast, but that's mainly what I wanted to center on and stress is, I talk about certain traps and getting good quality traps, and that's another thing is these traps, the Dukes, MB550s, whatever, they're going to last a long time. I had somebody ask me the other day about springs on MB550s. How long would the 2 coils last? I said, heck, I've had a dozen 550s for over 10 years now, still rocking on, hadn't given them any helper springs or anything like that. These traps are an investment, but they're going to last as long as you are trapping, probably darn near it. My son, there's no doubt in my mind he's going to be using some of my traps, so that's something to keep in mind too. If you start thinking about it like a trapper and you really get into it and it kind of really gets into you, it's no different than deer hunting and spending $500 on a rifle and another $500 on a scope, things like that. Rifle probably, it'll hold more value probably than your dozen traps. It's all dependent, but there's more people that want to buy rifles than traps, right? But it's definitely an investment, but it's not something that's going to go away. You're going to have those traps. You can always sell them. You always use them. Hang them up in the barn. I've got traps that my granddaddy used, and been around for twice as long as I've been alive. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But don't let perfection or anything like that stop you. Don't let worrying about I got to have this, or I can't do it, stop you. Get whatever you can get. Start trapping, and then as you progress, as you sell fur, and go to reinvest and kind of upgrade there. One other thing I was going to mention about traps and what you can do is with your pan or your dog. You can take this and take a pair of vice grips or a big pair of channel locks, and you can squeeze this where it attaches to the trap frame. You see it's a loop there. You can take that and squeeze it down tighter, and so it'll take out a lot of the side-to-side play. Like right now, that thing will move an inch, half an inch both ways. If you squeeze that down, it takes it out where it stays right there in line with the pan, and it's not, you don't have to worry about it wobbling and wiggling. And that'll also help you some if you're worried about needing to bend your frame in. Squeezing that will give you a little bit extra distance on your dog to help you get closer to the pan. So another thing to keep in mind. Another thing, and all this is just general trap modification. Charlie Dobbins has got a book that's been around forever about the foothold trap and its modifications or something like that. There's all kinds of videos on it. Another thing is, if you look on these ears where the pan fits, there's a bolt in there. Well, that bolt and the pan is smaller than where those ears are, so they're bent in, which can give you uneven tension on the pan as it rotates. And so one thing you can do too is put one or two in Trap and Supply catalogs. You'll see them like a number 19 brass washer or something like that. But you can take those out and put a washer in there to kind of level it up and to even those ears out so that you're getting good consistent pressure all the way through. And then checking your pan, getting a feel for what tension you want. That's another thing. And then you can always add 4 coils. That's kind of talking about the MB550s and how long the springs will last and all too. A brand new 2-coil trap is plenty strong. I mean, unless you're busting through frozen ground, down here in the South, 2 coils is plenty. And if you ever get concerned about that, or you feel like your springs are getting weak, you can always add helper springs to the other side or fully 4-coil the other side, and you're back in business, back in action. So that's another thing to consider. But anyway, I hope that was helpful. Like I said, I just wanted to reiterate and make sure I am kind of a trap snob, but that's because I've had the experience of using the other traps and seeing the benefits of paying a little more and investing a little more in your traps. And as you progress in your trapping career, you'll start to see that too, I think. And that may adjust where you invest and what traps you like and what traps you buy. So, but the bottom line is, get some traps and start trapping. Get whatever traps you can and start trapping, because that's the way you're going to learn and become a better trapper and catch animals. Not daydreaming and sitting here watching YouTube, as much as I appreciate you watching YouTube or listening to the podcast. So, speaking of podcasts, I was going to throw out just a recommendation of a podcast that I found lately. It's been around a while. It's the Order of Man podcast, but with Ryan Mickler. And I've just he's had he's had that podcast for I think 4 years now, and a whole community that goes along with it. But I just found it and just started listening to it, and man, I like what he's doing. It's kind of he's kind of pointing out and calling out, that's the way society is belittling and downplaying men and their role and masculinity, and really calling men to step up and fight back and recognize the place we have as providers, protectors, I think it's definitely something I've enjoyed listening to it. I've enjoyed his outlook and his output and his input on how to better ourselves as men. And if any women are out there listening, I appreciate you listening. I don't have any good advice for women, podcasts for women, but and especially with a son and raising a son and trying to grow him into a good, productive, well-rounded man. Somebody that he can be proud of himself, and I want to be proud of him. I am proud of him, but there's so many things that seem kind of society, and that's easy to say. I don't know who exactly society is, but is kind of downplaying or trying to remove the masculinity, and say that that's not necessary. But if you're listening to this and as a trapper and a hunter and a conservationist as an outdoorsman, probably preaching to the choir here, but I don't know. That's a podcast that I recently started listening to. I enjoy it, so check it out if you're looking for a podcast, and let me know what you think. I'm enjoying that one, and let me know what other podcasts you listen to that you find valuable and that you enjoy. I'm always looking. Heck, I've probably got 20 podcasts that I listen to, all ranging from spiritual and religious to business and trapping and hunting, and so I really enjoy that. I really enjoy. Man, it's been years since I listened to the radio. I enjoy listening to that and trying to keep my brain active and working and trying to better myself. Honestly, it's easy to turn on that radio and just kind of zone out. And I spend a lot of time in the truck and listening to stuff, and so I really like having that time where I'm trying to grow and benefit myself versus just listening to whatever ridiculous new country song is out now. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. It's been 80 degrees today in Georgia, which is ridiculous, but we got cool weather coming, I think, this weekend, so I'm pumped up about that. Trap line's been a little bit slow. I got a new property set up, a couple new properties set up, and ready for some cool weather because I think that's going to really pay off. I've been whittling out the possums and raccoons, which I'm not complaining about. They've been keeping me busy skinning, but ready to catch some coyotes and bobcats. Hopefully that's coming soon. And other than that, I appreciate y'all watching. Appreciate y'all listening. Give me a thumbs up or a 5-star rating, review, and I'll try to read us a review next time we do this. And if you got any topics or suggestions, let me know. I'm just trying to kind of cover the gamut and hit, right now with trapping season, hit some things that have been brought up and people have been asking me about. And then, as we go out of trapping season, I'll try to change it around and talk about, trap preparation. And, of course, coming up with spring is a big time for kind of a predation trapping. So we'll talk about that some and keep it going and keep it worth listening to. I've been getting a lot of good feedback and a lot of folks that like listening to the trapping talk, and so that's what we're going to keep doing. But other than that, hope y'all keep going on the trap line, and we'll see you next time.